Start. Got it. Oh, I'm going to record just to be safe. Okay. Great. People are coming in. Oh, good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Get everybody popping in here. Glad everybody can join us. Actually, we're going to give everybody just a little bit longer, about a minute or so, to get everybody else in. A couple more people are actually, some of our team members at MassMAP are asking how far into the webinar are we, and we actually just got started, so they're not late yet, thankfully.
Just finished. Everything's solved. Figured it all out.
That's a wrap.
Yeah.
Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, everybody's like, wait, how far are you? I'm like, we just got started. Yeah, so welcome, good morning. I'm gonna send this, just got started. Got a little text going out there. Thanks everybody for taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us for our CMMC 1.0 to 2.0 journey. This morning we are joined by Synagex. We have with us Synagex's own Mr. Rogers, Pete Morin, and John Sinopoli. We also have our very own Rich Sullivan with us. He's one of our business development advisors. And then in the background, we have Emma Mailman, our marketing coordinator, and Matt Healy, who is our IT manager. So we like to have a full staff. We bring a full workload in when we do one of these webinars. A lot of heavy lifting going on today. So we like to have a full staff. So thanks for joining us. Rich is going to go over a little bit about why we're here today, what we're doing, and then introduce Pete and John, and then they'll talk to you a little bit about what's going on, and then we'll open it up through some Q&A. As you can see, we are doing this in a webinar format. For those of you that have just jumped in or are jumping in right now, you'll see we are live on Facebook. So hello everyone out in Facebook. But also know that if for any reason, if you know someone that could benefit from watching this that maybe didn't get registered in time today, this will live live out on our Facebook page at MassMAP. So you can go ahead and send them there, and the link will be there. They'll be able to watch the webinar itself. If you are new to Zoom, I don't know where you've been for 2 years, but I'm glad you finally climbed out from underneath that rock. And welcome to Zoom, because on the bottom bar, you will see we have a couple of options for you to engage with us today. We will be asking you a poll question. That's a good way for our speakers to gauge the audience and know who is on what path of this journey that we are going down for CMMC. We also have a chat bubble and a Q&A bubble. So the Q&A bubbles, we strongly encourage you to put your questions in there. Any questions that you have regarding what we're going to discuss over the next hour, we really encourage you to do that. We ask you to put those questions in there because more than likely somebody else has a similar question to you if you're thinking it as well. So put it in there so everybody can see the question and it will get answered. If there's something that you have that's more specific that maybe you want to send, specifically to Rich or to Pete or to John, maybe myself or Emma, please go ahead and just pop that into the chat. And that is something that we can see ourselves. But when it comes to this topic and the subject content, we strongly encourage you to use the Q&A. So without further ado, I think I've got all my housekeeping cleaned up. I'm going to turn it over to Rich and let's get started.
Thanks, Haley. Happy New Year, everyone. This is one of our first webinars of 2022. It's a whopping 8 degrees where I am right now, so I hope you're staying warm. Today, our goal really is just to discuss the differences between CMMC 1.0 and CMMC 2.0, which is rolling out shortly. Some of you may be asking, what the heck is CMMC 1.0? So we'll hopefully clarify some of that as well. Very briefly, I'm going to just go through what MassMAP is and why we're here and what we do. So very quickly, we are the Manufacturing Extension Partnership affiliate in Massachusetts. We were set up, or the MEP network was set up in 1988 through an act of Congress. We are federally subsidized, and our only job is to help small, medium-sized manufacturing companies. And we do that with operational excellence services that basically improve your bottom line and make things more efficient, allow you to produce your products better, stronger, and faster. We also do workforce training to reskill and upskill your workers, which helps everyone. And we have growth services as well that we're offering on the top line side of your business to improve your market share and your revenue. Basically, if you need any help with any part of your business, give us a call and we can more often than not help you. To qualify to be a Mass MEP client, you have to make something, basically. And we serve all manufacturing sectors. If you're making something, then you qualify to be an MEP client. Oops. So the question, sorry, my mouse is a little flaky. Question can be, basically is why cybersecurity? Why is the DoD concerned with cybersecurity, and why is the DoD forcing you to improve your cybersecurity posture? And this is the Lockheed F-35 that came out a little over a decade ago. Around the same time, China introduced their model, which looks a lot like ours. And keep in mind that they didn't hack into Lockheed's network and steal all their intellectual property. They basically aggregated lots and lots and lots of small company data and were able to piece together their own puzzle, which was embarrassing to the US DoD. So what they did was they started forcing the entire defense industrial base to comply with some level of information security. Right now, the CMMC is the big buzzword. It started off very aggressively, and then they realized at some point that it was a little bit too aggressive, so they kind of backed it off. We're going to talk about that later on today. It started off in, I think, 2013 or so with DFARS, where they basically said, you have to improve your cybersecurity, or else we're going to ask you again nicely. So no one did anything. But to answer that, they put the interim rule into effect, which basically requires you to have some level of cybersecurity, or at least an assessment of your cybersecurity posture. And you have to upload that to the Department of Defense website and basically do an assessment, either have an assessment done or do your own assessment following the NIST guidelines. And then you take that information, your gap analysis, your plan of action and milestones, which is your roadmap to how you're going to be more secure, and you have to upload that. And a lot of this is kind of daunting for a lot of companies, especially if you don't have an IT department, which many small manufacturers don't. And even if you have an IT guy, very often the IT guy is not a cybersecurity guy. They often know enough to be dangerous, but the fact of the matter is that you probably need help. And that's where we come in. So we've managed to get some federal money in the past, which is kind of sporadic, and state money to help you out, so we can subsidize the cost of a lot of this for you. And this is for any part of your manufacturing business, whether it's getting your shop floor organized, making things more efficient, and just using your existing resources to their maximum effectiveness. We can help you with that, and we can have it basically paid for, either by the state or the federal government. And we're here to help. That's my end of the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Pete Morin from Synagex. Synagex is one of our cybersecurity partners of choice, and they are providing the services on our behalf to our clients. So Pete, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Haley, and
the group from Mass MEP for having us today. So I'm going to share some slides. Rich led well into where CMMC has been and how we got started and the why to CMMC. So what I'd like to share today is what's the latest news in CMMC, what was released. Like, we're here because in November, everyone heard that, whoa, the DoD released some major changes coming to CMMC. So what are those changes? What might those changes look like to you? And how do we move forward from here? And then if there are some questions, answer those questions on how this affects your organization moving forward. So this first slide, many of you may have seen already. This is a popular slide out there, or some version of it. It's showing what this new CMMC Model 2 looks like. But where did we come from? What Rich went into with the first version, Model 1. So I like this image, just because it clearly shows what was it in the past, where are we moving today, CMMC Model 2, the big changes, that we are moving to this 3-level rather than the initial 5 levels. We're reducing, the DoD listened to the organizations like yours that are here with us today, that, hey, there's some concerns about implementing these 130 controls that you're asking us to do. There's some concern about funding and the complexity of implementing this. So they took a step back and said, okay, what can we change? What can we, how can we make this easier, but still enforce the security level of CMMC? So that the whole goal was to implement very high level practices in smaller organizations to protect your company and the CUI data that you might have, or contract data, from cyber attack or cyber espionage. So they built this 3-level model. We're taking a step back to, in level 2, just meet the original NIST SP 800 171 model. So when Rich was saying, okay, back in 2013 or thereabouts, NIST was rolled out. Everyone was asked to self-attest to NIST. CMMC came out 1.0 and said, okay, everyone, whether you're a level 1 or a level 5, you're going to have to go through some certification process. So there'd be these third-party certifiers coming in to say, okay, we've assessed your organization. This is where your gaps are, what you need to close to be at a level 1 through level 5. So now it's just your level 1 basic cyber hygiene practices. That all that's going to require is your annual self-assessment. So again, in 1.0, level 1 did require every 3 years being certified by a third party. Now it's just annual self-assessment. Level 2, we're matching that 110 practices in the NIST. And then level 3, a lot of the details of that are still unknown and being worked out, but it's going to follow a lot of the practices in NIST 800-172.
So good news. I mean, my oversimplified brain here says, right, we started off with this huge menu at a new restaurant with a million different choices, and now we have beef, chicken, and fish. Right? Is that a fair analogy?
It's like a wedding.
Yeah.
That's a fair analogy. Threw me off my game there.
So are we shooting for fish, chicken, or beef?
Yeah. But if you go into level 2, there are multiple options here now. So maybe vegetarian and fish at level 2. So that was the big change here at level 2. As you see on this slide, and this has added some confusion, of course, is a level 2, you're now at advanced level in CMMC 2.0, but they're saying, oh, some of you you have prioritized acquisition data and some are non-prioritized acquisition data. Okay, that clarified everything. So what does that mean? Who's going to have to be, and what does that mean to us? Well, it means if you have the prioritized data, you do have to be certified every 3 years through a third-party process. If you have the non-prioritized, you're going to do the annual assessment, just like self-assessment, just like level 1 organizations. They're figuring the majority of these companies are going to have to hit that just non-prioritized. The contract data is going to be very clear on if you have to be a certified level 2. Otherwise, you're self-attesting, you're still being tracked in the SPRS system that the NIST utilized for scoring. And for that non-prioritized data, it's people that are making more, I've used this analogy many times, the widgets, or you might be making boots or clothing, something in that spectrum where, or you're a small machine shop making, when I say widgets, that small part of widget that's unidentifiable to how would that fit into that F-35 that Rich talked about earlier. If you can't take that part and initially figure out how it fits into the whole model, you're most likely going to hit that non-prioritized data, and you're only going to have to do the self-assessment. Though the self-assessment is a lot to take on for small organizations because it's an annual review of your maturity model. So you will have to go through that process. So the practices though, so moving in, what else did this change? You probably heard that it eliminates the maturity process. We're still CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity certification. So it did not eliminate all maturity practices. What that meant was the maturity of your policies and processes might not need to be in place for as long. When you were going for a CMMC 1.0 level 3 certification, which is in direct alignment now with level 2, you didn't have to, or you had to show that all these practices were in place for at least a year. Now they're easing that and saying, okay, when they say eliminate maturity processes, let's say you're going for your certification tomorrow, you could have implemented these policies last month and you're meeting the maturity practice requirements on that. Some of the things that it eliminated, so we went from 110 or 130 controls in the new NIST, or in the new CMMC 1.0. 2.0 is back to that 110 controls. So there are some things like advanced email security, that those controls were eased or eliminated from the model. And so
yeah, I mean, I guess just to kind of throw 2 cents out there again, right? It sort of seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, but this new compliance model makes it a little bit more palatable for businesses to get into alignment. What we saw in 1.0 was that kind of level 3 was that watermark, right? Where everybody was shooting for sort of applicable across the board. Included some things in level 3 that were pretty difficult to achieve, right? Financially, even from an IT practice, right? Trying to deploy, the SIM and SOC solutions, that were kind of the big stretch in level 3. In this new model, we're seeing that some of that stuff is a little bit easier to attain, and we're talking about maybe a little less pressure for audit, right?
That's correct. Still mixed in there at different levels. So you hear that they're removing 20 controls from this model. You might not have to hit the same advanced level of these controls by removing those, but things like SIM for tracking, event management, they're still there. You just might not have to hit the same high level requirement that was in the previous version. Same with email security. It eliminates some of the controls that are required, but with some of the controls leading up to that, you would still have to have some level of that security implemented to meet all the other controls. The other changes that we're seeing are you might hear from POAM, your plan of action and mitigation, which Rich referenced earlier, and your SSP, so your system security plan. In 1.0, you had to close out all your POAM. So your POAM had to be 100% complete. So that plan of action and milestones, you would have had to meet each of those requirements before being certified or even gaining a contract. Now they're easing that and saying, well, as long as you have a POAM in place and you're close, the contract can look at and say, to evaluate that and say, okay, here are your gaps, that's acceptable. You can have this contract and work under your POAM until that's complete. So POAM and SSP still exist, just a little difference on how they're going to manage those.
Kind of an interesting approach, I think, the 1.0 and 2.0 differences, or the sort of teeth behind it, a pretty drastic change in approach and sort of thinking about, if I'm a business owner manufacturing parts, and impacted by this sort of thing, pretty different way to think about it. And, I think in coming off of 1.0 and all its complexity and the number of controls, a welcome relief in from a compliance perspective, but also have to consider the why, right? Whenever, right, we own small business as well, right? And obviously we're subject to compliance and cybersecurity and have to think about the things we have to do to take care of our customers and their needs. Kind of thinking about the why. What is the reason, that all of this CMMC compliance is kind of getting thrown in my direction? Why is this my problem? I think the jet is a great example. It's a big one, right? We as a country must have lost a lot of data for them to replicate a jet. That's a pretty big deal. But I think a little bit about the way that our country works in the world, from a political perspective, and demonstrates power, right? Historically, that's been with nuclear power, right? I mean, that if we kind of boil it down, we sit at the table based on the number of nukes that the country has in comparison to Russia and China and
or firepower in general.
And firepower, yeah, right. But that's the classic way of thinking, right? And I think what we're seeing is the world shift. And obviously manufacturing is a huge part of that when it comes to the Department of Defense and where we're making investments, right? Or where other countries are making investments. And we're seeing other countries really invest more in fast, agile, technology, in cyber related technology as a military power. And so what I see is that our government's really kind of on the defensive to this, right? We're seeing it. We need to address it, and CMMC is a way for us as a nation to kind of pay attention and contribute to that. So I like that we've softened it and made it attainable. Right. But the why behind this is important. The why behind this is that if we're making parts that contribute to our national defense, then these things are very important.
Yeah, and it's not just defense contractors that should be looking at this either, because with all the ransomware attacks that are prevalent now, any manufacturer that's making anything is vulnerable. One of the biggest myths, and I've talked to a lot of companies, they all very often they'll say, well, I'm too small for any hacker to care about. I'm too small for them to worry about. And it has nothing to do with how small you are. You're not being targeted, right? These are opportunistic attacks, and there are these automated software programs that just go out and look for vulnerabilities and IP addresses and report back to the hackers and say, hey, we found these 1,000 websites or 1,000 networks that are that have security issues. And then they start automatically attacking and automatically, sending malware payloads. And, it's not a matter of I'm too small or no one cares about me. It's just if you happen to have vulnerabilities in your network, they're going to get exploited at some point.
And think about, I think right now it's very sort of relevant to consider the supply chain issues that everybody's having, right? I'm sure we have DoD suppliers who rely on commercial supply chains, to make their parts. Well, if you were going to cripple, a particular military defense system, where would you strike? You could cripple a supply chain, for a manufacturer that makes gaskets for an F-35 that keeps them grounded.
Nuts and bolts.
Exactly.
just
exactly.
Cut off the nuts and bolts.
Exactly.
How do you assemble anything?
That's the world we live in. So you're absolutely right. It's not just those that are direct suppliers to the DoD. It's as a nation, sort of how we're approaching cybersecurity. It's very important. I didn't mean to take our webinar off into this meta world of cybersecurity, but I don't know. To me, when I'm thinking about regulation and thinking about controls, it's very easy to get lost and to just kind of say, hey, I got to check the boxes here and just get this out of my way so I can keep doing what I do. And CMMC 2.0 in some ways has kind of given us more opportunity to be able to do that because we don't have Big Brother coming in the doors unless we're in a very specific category. But there's a responsibility here, and I believe that as a compliance body, this is just an ease in. This is just okay, we were assertive, it didn't quite work out, we're getting a lot of pushback, but to me, it's kind of a warning shot, a real warning shot, because this is not something that's going away, right? The self-attestation is a little bit of a, okay, a little bit more time to get on board here, but this is not something that's going away. We've got to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
And it's a good,
you hit on a good thing. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going
ahead.
to say, it's on the timing side of it. That's why we asked the question at the beginning.
Right.
We do talk about it behind, when behind closed doors, when we have these conversations, we talk about the manufacturers and what they're saying, really, we've been talking about this for, every time I talk to Rich, I feel like it goes back even further and further. Like, I thought it was 2015. He's like, no, I think it was really 2013. Like, is this really making an impact? So that's why we asked the question, when of the initial poll, and saying, what are your thoughts on it? And is this really going to make a difference? Does this mean the timing is getting crunched? Are we really moving forward with this, or are we just going to keep going through this like Groundhog Day over and over again?
Well, that's where the interim rule came into effect, and CMMC is starting to show up in contracts. So as soon as they hit your wallet, it gets your attention. And John mentioned, checking off a box. The interesting thing about CMMC is it's not about checking off a box anymore. It has to be a culture shift in your organization. It has to be something that's ongoing, just like continuous improvement. It has to be, because the threats are changing all the time. The landscape is ever changing. There are more and more. There's a bigger attack surface now when you're adding technology to your manufacturing environment, right? You're starting to put sensors everywhere, and you're starting to automate. You get SCADA systems and ERP systems and MRP systems running, MES. It's like the more you automate your manufacturing facility, the more holes you open up, and the bigger the danger. So this has to be a culture change. Everybody has to be involved. It can't just be one person's responsibility. It has to be the entire company.
And you were talking too about, so we're getting asked these questions on, do we still do this? Like, okay, this has changed and morphed several times over the last few years. We thought our date was October 2025, I think was the last date for 1.0. Yes, we still need to be moving forward. What the DoD's requiring now is any current contract or upcoming contract will at least state meeting your NIST 800-171 requirements, but there'll be benefits that they're trying to enact to encourage organizations once 2.0 is finalized to say, yes, if you do it ahead of time, then you might have a better chance at gaining contracts. And so what is the new timeline? In November, they said it's okay, we need to give 60 days for public comment. So that 60 days has passed. I've been out there trying to find out what has the public comment period kind of drummed up, not hearing that as of yet. But so that 60 days has passed. Now we go into that rulemaking process. So it goes into a 9 to 24 month window of it goes through that process of, do these rules all align with our intent? What needs to change or may change to make it fit? So 2.0 might become 2.1 in 6 months before this is really rolled out. But one of the big changes we did see before or since November is that the DoD has released some new information. So they printed some documentation on scope guidance, so level 1 and level 2 scope guidance, CMMC 2.0 model overview, that's their biggest document, and then some assessment guides for both level 1 and level 2, and the level 3 stuff will come later. But that's really important, is that we see some traction, that it's not just we're making these changes, but here's the documented meat behind that, the meat and potatoes, what you have to do to meet that 2.0. So even if you're curious about that, I can share a link to the website from the DoD that will link you to those documents. So if you do want to get started and read some of that data, it is out there, and I think everyone should take a look at it.
Yeah,
You
and
said
the other thing,
something earlier too, about, I think, I don't know, or maybe it was Rich that may have said it as well. We talk about the repercussions. Obviously, Rich said when it hits your wallet. Are there any other repercussions that may come out of this? I know we had talked about, the self-certification process, and does that have any impacts, or is this really what it boils down to when it comes to just like the contracts? And if you don't do it, you're not going to get these contracts.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is kind of a little bit of that, right? That the primes will have some stake in their supply chain, right, and their posture and their risk tolerance for their supply chain. I'd imagine will have some impact here. We've also heard some mumblings about, even with self-attestation, some personal stake from business leadership and ownership for falsifying, right? And that's difficult, right? I mean, I think they're putting some accountability in business leadership to have a responsible posture, for IT. And that's not something that I feel many business owners themselves feel very comfortable talking about, right? So how do you deal with that? That's a challenge. To what degree that is the government going to sue business owners? I don't know. So for me, to some degree, the ambiguity makes me as a business owner a little uncomfortable, right? If we were, and we do provide services to primes and to many DoD suppliers, we don't have controlled unclassified information, so there's a little difference, but we have to be very wary of this stuff, and the guidance makes me uncomfortable. I personally would feel like at least having some command, some control over the general posture, and having a good sense of where I am in sort of relation to what they're saying, right? Okay, maybe I sit at 80% for a while, right? And I'm okay with this. But I know that I'm 20% from hitting this mark if I need it. that would make me feel much better, right? From a personal liability perspective, from a winning a contract perspective, whatever that's going to be, just having command over that situation and feeling secure is kind of what we're talking about, right? That's a big deal.
Yeah, and that and the timing. I mean, this isn't something you can wait until the day before it's due, and cram. This is a process, and it's not a super fast process. It's a pretty complex process. So it requires, some forethought and some planning. And if you're 80 or 90% there, then it's much easier to get that last 10 or 20%. But if you're, 2% there, then you've already lost. It's trickling down now. I had a conversation with the Air Force a few weeks ago, and they distribute a lot of SBIR grants and STTR grants to mostly small companies, but not always small companies. And they're requiring those companies to comply with CMMC now because they're working on R&D on products that could potentially leak classified information. And academia. There's a lot of universities that do a lot of DoD R&D work and development work. And they're realizing, oh, right, they're part of the DoD supply chain as well, technically. And now they're requiring those organizations to comply. So it's gonna trickle down.
Rich, so this is a little off, we hadn't talked about this in the past, but I very often, while I'm out with friends who own manufacturing companies, giving out free consulting work, right? They give me a couple of beers and they ask questions. The question I get often is, give me the definition of controlled unclassified information. If all this stuff is centered around that, we're talking about ambiguous compliance with, at its core. Have you gotten a much clearer definition as to what CUI is?
That's been contentious since the beginning of CMMC. And it ultimately comes down to the prime or the customer who's providing you with the add files or whatever else to let you know what that CUI is and what information needs to be protected. If they can't tell you, then obviously you can't secure it.
Right. So if I own a business and all I really to date have sort of respected is what I've been told is CUI, but someday that definition becomes much more strict. How do I deal with that?
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's where, being 80 or 90% of the way there makes it easier just to switch on the controls for whatever information you're being told is CUI. I think that the safe bet is to just protect anything that comes from a client. If you're from your prime customer or your first tier customer or whatever it is, and I think that's good for any practice. If you're a contract manufacturer, you want to protect the information that's your customer's information that's going to potentially leak and lose your business.
Right.
It's kind of like doctor-patient privilege.
Yeah,
and that's a good practice, and that's what we're telling many of our clients now is that, well, treat it all. If the contract has some CUI in it, treat it all as CUI, and you're protected. If your systems are in place and ready to protect CUI, you're there. You don't have anything to worry about. And all organizations are still trying to implement this. So some, even smaller groups within the larger primes, aren't always identifying the CUI properly. So it's better to protect yourself and make sure that those things are safe and secure through the entire process.
Right.
You guys talk about the process. Is there an idea that you can give on how long, and could you estimate? I know we talked about this in the previous podcast we did. We had Harley on from the Coding House, and he walked through everything with us. But for people that are, maybe first time really getting into this today, can you give them an idea and timeline for that?
And I think that was a good example. And since Harley had shared some of his story too, that they are a small organization that when they received their first contract request to meet some of these requirements, their expectation was, oh, is this something we can turn around in a month and be certified and compliant? And I think as they worked through the process too, they realized, okay, this is from the beginning. If you haven't looked at it at all, you're looking at a year and year plus out. It's not something you're going to turn around in a few months' time.
I think we tried to highlight in that case, right? So they were doing some new business with a prime. So they got kind of the new supply chain process from this prime, right? It's I'm sure there's a process for evaluating the existing supply chain and keeping that up to snuff, at least to date. What they got was sort of the new hire, right, procedure, which was pretty vicious. Not vicious in a bad way, but yes, okay, self-attestation, but show us a little bit more, right? And it wasn't something that was federally mandated. That was a good example of how Prime, can take control of that and add a little bit more color in comparison to what CMMC says you have to do.
Right.
And if you're required to protect it, your subcontractors are required to protect it. If you might share this data with a subcontractor, you're required to ensure they have the same level of protection from that cybersecurity standpoint.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is everybody scared now?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I was just gonna say, if anybody has any questions, it's a great time to ask those questions. If you want to hear a little bit more about that situation that we just talked about when it came to the coding house, we did a podcast. We have a podcast available. It's on our massmep.org website, and we sat down and we sat with John and Pete and Harley, and it was just got to know, to hear his perspective of it, because it's the first time we really had that opportunity to sit with one of our clients and say, hey, how did this go for you? And he went through the whole step, and he said he learned so much from going through that process. It was like, just like when we always say, every time we're on and we do something with Synagex, your mind gets blown. And he said it was continuous, just like the things you wouldn't even think of and how important they were going through that process. But you can listen to that a little bit more, if you want to know more about that. And it'll be relatable, like we focus on, like Rich said, we work with a lot of small, medium-sized manufacturers, and that they're small. We consider them a small manufacturer. They're under 100 employees. So a lot of people will be like, wait, what do you mean by small or medium? It's by number of employees. It's okay. It's not, if we've had people coming back and say, oh, I make multi-millions, and it's not about your profit. It's not about your bottom line. It's about your number of employees. So if you're on the smaller side, under 100 employees, you're considered a small manufacturer, and that's what the coding house is. So there's a lot of people in here today in the group they're on the small size, so they can relate to that and relate to Harley and the coding house and what they do. Do you guys have anything else, like any other, are we thinking, you said possibly 2.1, are we thinking we're going to go that way? Do you think there'll be some more, like, and Rich always says this, it's just like continuous improvement. We always have to stay on it, and hopefully they will. But do you think we'll be seeing that again this year, or do you think we might be kind of quiet for a little bit?
Well, when we're talking about a process that might take 9 to 24 months to hash out the rules on it, we will likely see some changes throughout that process. So some interim rules again.
Yeah, it moves at the speed of government, which is not very fast. But these things have been around for long enough that companies should be at least seriously thinking about what it's going to take and when they're going to roll this out, and when to start addressing. I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, in a lot of companies. Do you have passwords on your email? No. So super basic stuff, and a lot of it's low cost, no cost. Just policy procedure kind of stuff you can put in place. very quickly and very easily, just to start with a Band-Aid or two, and then work your way up. And again, we've got programs in place, we've got funding to back it up. It's as long as you're paying your taxes to the state, you pretty much qualify for these grants that most companies don't realize are out there. I spent many years in the private sector in manufacturing, had no idea that stuff was available, because you're just used to being self-sufficient. And it turns out that the government is there to help, and it's largely because, without this, companies don't survive. And it's in everybody's best interest to keep manufacturers manufacturing, and keep them employing people, and just keep the whole economy moving. And that's why the government is interested in making this work and helping out.
I'm curious, Haley, so the question you asked in the poll, I'm really curious about what folks,
Result.
yeah, how do they feel? That's a great question.
So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna relaunch this because I want everybody to, like, now that you've heard and you've listened, so we can actually answer as well. But now that you've heard what we've talked about for the past, 45 minutes, answer the question again. So, and see, but previously it was actually the third answer, which was, I think this is the push they needed, and this 1.0 to 2.0 thing is the real deal. So tell us all about it in the webinar. So people were more inclined to answer that way. And that's what they chose and said, yeah, absolutely, I'll pick that one. And that was where the strongest response was. There was a couple in the nothing. We've been hearing the same thing for years, but we like you guys, so thought we would join. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, it made me feel really good for a second about the state of our cybersecurity, and I must have missed that in the first question. So apparently that's much a stronger sentiment than hanging out with us, which.
Yeah. I did relaunch it again for those that maybe didn't answer it the first time, but I did just get one that says they're in the middle. So there may be something happening. So we joined the webinar just in case. So, I think we talk about it a lot. We do joke about it. And that's why we ask this question, because a lot of people do say, okay, how does this really impact me? Is it really going to impact me? And they just keep seeing timelines. And, Rich made a statement. He's like, I can just bury my head in the sand again, and, and it'll go away. And is that really where they are right now and what they're thinking? But we always say, you may actually think that, but that's not. We talk about how it affects your bottom line, and we talk about what it could impact to you later on down the road. And that, I asked Rich the question yesterday, if we have the funding, what's the difference of providing the funding versus just doing it themselves? And he's like, no, you always want to use the funding. Like, you always want to use the funding, like it's some people may go into it and be like, it's a tax write-off and I'll get this done. But we have that available. So knowing those resources are out there, we really can walk you through pretty easily every step of this, and we start, Rich comes in and talks to you, and what do you need and what are you looking for? And then Synagex comes in and they get you going on this path, and Rich works you through, and we have a grants team that comes in, and it's literally walking. We help you get through the process. We don't do it for you, but we show you and kind of, advise you. We're business development advisors is what Rich is classified as, if we're going to go for classified information, and at Mass MEP, and he's a business development advisor. So he advises, these manufacturers on how to do this. So we're here, we help, and it isn't, we're always there. We come back, and I know you guys do the same thing. It's not like you're not done with Harley at the Coning House. That's something, you'll have that relationship and that connection, and you'll network back and forth with that. There's other things that are going to come up he's going to need as well. So that's what we do, and this, which is why we do the webinar itself.
There's a couple of things at play too. You typically don't know what you don't know. And our manufacturing clients, they're experts at what they do, which is manufacturing. It's not IT security. And for them, a lot of times it's a little daunting. It's a little confusing, and makes sense because it's not their primary business. So that's why we we come in and we act as an extension of their workforce, and we bring in the experts to actually fix the problems and use us for all we're worth.
It's a good thing. I mean, we fancy ourselves IT experts, and there is no way I could make some of the cool stuff I see at some of these clients. So we're happy to complement those skill sets with what we do.
Yeah, I mean, you see a specialist, right?
Yeah.
When you have health issues, you don't go down to the bar and ask the bartender for advice. You find the right source or resource.
It's a complicated world. Pete and I are not the type, to go straight geek to try to impress people. But it is a complicated world, and it's not getting simpler. We work with all sorts of clients, nonprofits, banks, right, commercial space, all of it, and we get similar sorts of questions about technology, right? So everything's going to the cloud. Do I really have to worry about this, right? CMMC 2.0, do I really need to worry about this? It's a good question, because I think some of the marketing around some of this stuff claims to make your life simpler, or claims to alleviate some pain. But the fact of the matter is, there's been no major innovations in the core of technology. Servers, computers, processors, they all still exist. They just exist somewhere else, which makes it a little bit more difficult to secure, right? If you think about it, we're now working on things we can't see. They live in the cloud, right? And they need to be CMMC compliant. Awesome. So that's what we specialize in, and those are the sorts of things that Pete and I and the team here, we actually really enjoy, right? And there are ways to simplify that and make it applicable across industries. And the compliance kind of just helps, put some frame around that and give us a sheet of music, that we can measure against to make sure that we're doing the right things. So we're thrilled to be an ally to anybody who's listening right now. We obviously have a very strong partnership with Mass MEP, and can help to supplement any of the services that they provide from a cybersecurity lens, and we're always happy to do that.
Yeah.
And we appreciate
All
it
right.
very much.
Yeah. Before we go, though, we always get one tip, usually. John and Pete always have something really good. Do you guys have anything today? Like, I've changed all my passwords now. What was the last one? I mean, there's always something that you have that we learn from every time. Do you have one that maybe you can give everybody right before we close out?
You got one, Pete? I can think of one.
Go ahead.
All right. This one might be a little daunting, but it actually is a really nice tip for those out there who own businesses. Microsoft is starting to get their stuff together when it comes to, well, at least to the CMMC 1.0 sheet of music. I don't know if it's been updated yet, but it's worth checking out with your IT service provider or in your office tenant. Within that office portal, right, there is a service called Compliance Manager. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Compliance Manager within Office 365 will deploy a template to kind of just what it knows, just its world, right? Email, SharePoint, if we're using OneDrive, those sorts of things. And we'll give you kind of quick little checklist of best practice and securities that might help to spur some interesting perspective, right, on how secure your Office 365 environment is. For most of our customers, that's just a small portion of the world for them, but it is a tool we've used and is pretty darn helpful. I believe if you're paying for the higher licenses in 365, you can even use a CMMC template to help measure just that piece of your world. It's pretty weedy, I'll warn you. But it is a pretty cool automated service. It's a click of a button and it examines your environment, so it's kind of cool.
Super. I bet Matt's our IT manager. He's probably in there doing it right now. I know I'm gonna do it. when we get off. So yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's great. Thanks for that. That's see, every time I know there's something in there. That's why I have to ask that question, because I know you've got something stashed
Golden
in.
nugget.
Yeah, it's not
always.
as fun as like the passwords and scaring people about their televisions and Amazon devices at home, but
Great.
it's applicable.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah.
I kind of like those smart home devices, because I just have conversations about things and stuff just shows up.
Oh, here's another cool one for the ones that want more of a home applicable one. Do you know that you can review all of the voice recordings that Alexa records, even the stuff that like it doesn't recognize? Like if you say, "Hey Amanda," if it thinks you said Alexa, it'll record you and you can listen to it.
Yep.
Really fun if you have little kids.
Oh, this is just too much Big Brother.
You can also program custom answers to certain questions.
That's right.
You can say, who's the smartest person in the world? Name
Get
you.
out.
Yep.
Oh, I'm
Rich
doing
Sullivan.
it. I'm doing it. Yeah, totally doing it. I think I know we have one in our house that we're not supposed to even have. Like we don't allow those in our home, but one snuck its way in somewhere. One of these kids brought one in, so I might try and figure out how to program it. That's exciting. Yeah,
that's a fun one.
Who's the smartest person in the world? Your mom.
Yes, it's true.
Of course, always. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, Rich. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, John. Thanks, Emma, for coming in, and Matt. We hope everybody got something out of this. We did have a question that came across. They asked if they could have the slides, which absolutely. Rich he's our business development advisor, and also we classify him as a point of contact for this event. So he will be reaching out just to touch base with everybody, and after this is over, and he'll be able to provide you with the slides and anything else that you might need. It gives you an opportunity to have that contact point with us at Mass MEP, and then he usually is then from there, like we said, he'll advise you, and if you want to take a deeper dive with Synagex, he'll work his magic and has a little magic bag he pulls out and sprinkles it on, and
magic bag.
Synagex appears, and
Pixie
then
dust.
yeah, exactly. He's got his own. We have our little Mass MEP dust, is what we like to call it. So yeah, so he'll be in touch and he will provide that to you. So yeah, thanks everybody for taking some time out today. We'll give you 4 minutes back. Don't worry, we won't tell anybody in the office that you're getting an extra 4 minutes for lunch. We'll let it be what it is. But if you do have any other further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our website is massmep.org, and Synagex is SYNAGEX.com. So you got to throw that Y in there. So that's how you.
And all the letters are important.
Well, yeah, but I know we what was it today? We were looking at a company today, and somebody spelled it with an A versus an E. So it makes all the difference in the world when you're doing a web search. And you can find them all over social media too. We do a lot of posting back and forth with them as well on all of our social media channels. So you'll definitely be able to get in contact with one of us some way. So yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and we will talk to everybody soon.
Thanks, Haley.
Thank you. Appreciate it.